All right, it's just me. What's happening, all you wild and crazy second graders? This is Mr. Corcoran, and this is kind of like a podcast right now. I get to record myself at home, all cozy and warm. I hope that you guys are all having a great school year so far, and I am excited because today I get to share with you one of the great stories about one of the greatest thinkers of all time. And this story is called The Great Thinkers of Greece. And Greece had some amazing thinkers. In this story, your goal or your target is to recount or describe key ideas or details from a text read aloud or information presented orally or through other media. And this counts as other media. YouTube counts as other media. So in this picture right here, you could see that Socrates, my bad. Socrates is talking to all of his students. These guys are sitting around, and gals, are sitting around and listening to him talk about things that he knows. And he has some amazing students. And then for this story, there's some words that you're going to want to know. The first word is affection. Affection means fondness or liking. For example, Eddie looked at his new baby brother with great affection, and you can see the mom holding her baby. She's showing affection. The second word that you're going to need to know is astonishing. Say the word astonishing. Astonishing means causing surprise or amazement. For example, the fireworks display was an astonishing sight. All right, the next word that you need to know is excellent or wonderful or marvelous. My bad. The word is marvelous. Say marvelous. That means excellent or wonderful. An example of that is the singing group performed a marvelous concert in the park. Philosopher. Philosopher. A philosopher is someone who seeks to understand and explain people and the world in which they live. I feel like a philosopher sometimes. An example is Confucius was a famous Chinese philosopher. Proof. Proof is evidence or facts that support something is true. And that is a major part of what Socrates and Aristotle were talking about, was having proof. Science is the ability to prove that things are true, that they're real. And an example of proof is scientists continue to search for proof of life on other planets. All right, so without further ado, let's get into our story. Whew. He was the most famous philosopher who ever lived. His name was Socrates, and he lived in the city-state of Athens over 2,000 years ago. The stories about Socrates describe him as the most down-to-earth fellow that you could ever meet. These stories, written by his friends and students, tell us all we know about him, for Socrates never wrote anything down himself. According to these stories, there was no one more clever, no one more loyal to his friends, and no one so willing to poke fun at himself, and no one as glad to share everyday activities with you. But the one thing that made Socrates such a great philosopher was that he kept asking questions about why people did such everyday things. In the stories about Socrates, we hear about him sitting beneath a shady tree or walking with friends, always engaging in curious conversation. In one story, many guests are waiting for him to arrive at a dinner party. The guests and their host, a man named Agathon, are wealthy, well-educated Athenians who talk about sports, politics, and the latest plays. Some help run the family's large farms or travel to faraway lands on business trips as merchants. Some are political leaders in Athens, and a few are soldiers. None of them, however, spend their lives like Socrates, just thinking and asking questions to answer other questions. In this story, Socrates is older than the rest of the guests at the party, and he has almost no money to his name. He wears the same outfit day and night, and generally, he walks without shoes. Yet, in the other stories, we hear politicians, landowners, and soldiers speak of him with great affection and respect. At the dinner party, one Athenian says, "One day Socrates and I were passing through the marketplace. I bought a number of items for myself, and knowing that Socrates has little money, I offered to buy him whatever he wanted." Socrates said, "One reason for human unhappiness is that people always want more things than they need. When they get those things, they still want more. I think the happiest people are the ones with the least number of things. Just look at all the marvelous things in this marketplace that I don't want." Another dinner guest shares a different memory of Socrates. During the war, when we were soldiers together in the icy, cold winter, everyone else bundled up with as many clothes as possible. But Socrates gave another man his coat and boots, saying, "You need these more than I do." He marched barefoot, even over the ice, yet he outmarched the rest of us. And when we ran low on food, he still shared his food with others. Yet during the battle, he was the strongest of all. And though I received honors for bravery that day, Socrates was the real hero. Yes, I led the charge, but I became surrounded by enemy soldiers, and just as one of them knocked the sword from my hand, Socrates burst through them, scattering them left and right. Then he glared at them so fiercely that they ran away. He found me a sword and then said, "If I had known that making ugly faces could drive the enemy away, I could have won the battle for us for heaven knows how long. I'm ugly enough for that." As the guest finishes this retelling, Socrates himself finally arrived at the party. Agathon, the host, insists, "Sit next to me, Socrates, so I can hear your words of wisdom." Socrates laughs. "I feel you'll go thirsty, Agathon, for I have no wisdom for you to hear. I have only questions, not answers." In all the stories about Socrates, we read that his method of learning and teaching was to ask others questions like, "How do you know?" And "What do you mean?" For example, someone might say to him, "The way to lead a good life is to give to others," to which Socrates might respond, "How do you know?" By asking these questions, Socrates really wanted to cause people to think about their own lives and why they do certain things. Otherwise, he would say, "We will just repeat the same old mistakes everyone else has made. And when we end up doing good things, shouldn't we try to understand why they are good so that we can do more good things?" Somehow, it was always his company that people had moments of enlightenment. It was always in his company that people had moments of enlightenment. And of course, some people did not like Socrates. They said that he was wasting their time or confusing them by trying to change their minds. Socrates protested, "But I cannot change your mind. Only you can do that." Then he would just go on his way. Many of Socrates' friends went on to become great leaders of Greece, and many of his students became widely known and respected. One such student was an intelligent young fellow named Plato. A poet, champion athlete, and brave soldier, Plato paid close attention to what Socrates said. Later in his life, Plato wrote a book and reported his wonderful discussions. But as the years passed, Plato became famous himself, and he wrote more about his own ideas and the world, and then less about Socrates. Finally, Plato opened a school near a grove of olive trees that he called the Grove of Academia, and the school became famous as the Academy, a word that is still in use today for some schools. Here, Plato offered classes on all sorts of subjects: history, mathematics, music, literature, law, politics, and more. He would always ask, "What do you know about these things? How can we be sure that we are correct? How can we know? How can our knowing lead to greater happiness?" But by the time Plato taught at the academy, Athens had changed. It had gone through a long, terrible war. A terrible disease had swept through the city, and a disease that today we might be able to treat with modern medicine. Without such medicine, many Athenians died from this illness. Many of the happy young men and women of Plato's youth did not survive. Life was no longer easy or happy for him. He then began writing books that asked questions like, "Wouldn't life be nicer if we could only?" and continued to try to find proof to back up his ideas. Among Plato's students was a young man named Aristotle. Aristotle, too, wanted to understand people and things, but he looked at them in a way more like Socrates and then Plato. Aristotle thought, instead of looking for facts that prove what we already think is true, let us first study the facts and then try to understand what they mean. That simple idea would change the world. Aristotle would become the first great observer, studying things he could see and experiment with, such as plants, animals, human beings, and the stars and the planets. Aristotle's ideas and classifications, as you've heard referenced earlier, are still used in science today. Aristotle also believed in the importance of having balance in life. He thought doing or having too much of one thing, such as staying up too late, eating too many unhealthy foods, or even studying too much, did not allow time for other things you may need to do. Aristotle, like his teacher Plato, also opened a school in Athens. Aristotle's students and books he wrote spread across Greece and beyond, carrying Greek ideas to distant lands. Among Aristotle's students was an astonishing boy who would carry these ideas to the farthest of all. His name was Alexander, and you will learn about him in your next read aloud.